Tom Harrison leaned heavily against the porch rail of his workshop, feeling the bite of the morning air against his skin. The coffee in his battered thermos had long gone cold, but he sipped it anyway, tasting the metallic bitterness without really noticing. The sky above Elm Ridge stretched out in a hard, endless blue, broken only by the occasional circling hawk. Another quiet morning in a quiet town, where change moved slower than the rivers freezing over for winter. Tom's bones ached from the night's labor, but he felt a rare kind of contentment settle in his chest. Somewhere out there, Walter King would soon find his old Fairlane not just running, but gleaming, purring like a faithful hound waiting for its master. He tightened the collar of his worn jacket, absently scanning the horizon. That's when the sound reached him, low at first, a distant rumble that barely tugged at the edges of his attention. But within seconds, it grew, vibrating through the soles of his boots, rattling the few loose bolts in the porch rail. Tom frowned, setting down the thermos, and shielded his eyes against the sharp glare of the morning sun. Out of the clear blue, it appeared, a plane, but not any ordinary one. Its wings caught the light in long, blinding flashes as it dropped lower, the growl of its engine rising to a roar that filled the sky. It was a P-51 Mustang, unmistakable even after all these years, a ghost of World War II, polished to a mirror shine, alive again against all odds. Tom's heart leapt painfully against his ribs. He barely registered the screen door creaking open behind him as townsfolk spilled onto Main Street, drawn by the commotion. Farmers in mud-caked boots, shopkeepers still wearing their aprons, schoolchildren clutching their backpacks, all frozen, staring upward, as the Mustang made a perfect low sweep over the town square before banking gracefully toward the fallow field behind Harrison's garage. It touched down with a controlled rumble that sent up a small cloud of dust and withered grass. For a moment, silence ruled the town. Even the old stray dog that wandered between the hardware store and the diner sat on its haunches and stared, head tilted. Tom felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't coincidence. His gut, seasoned by years of hard work and harder luck, told him that something was about to change, and not just for him. Slowly, cautiously, he made his way across the cracked asphalt toward the edge of the field, the crowd parting unconsciously to let him through. Every step seemed heavier than the last. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears, could feel the judgment of the cold earth beneath his boots. The Mustang's cockpit popped open with a hiss of released pressure. Out stepped a man, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of figure that seemed carved from the same stone as the Montana mountains. His flight suit bore the marks of long service, and though his face was tanned and weathered, there was an undeniable sharpness to his bearing. He moved with the easy authority of someone who had spent years commanding the skies, but when he pulled off his leather helmet and goggles, his pale blue eyes swept the gathered crowd not with arrogance, but with something softer. Something searching. His gaze landed on Tom almost instantly. Without hesitation, the man made his way across the grass, each step deliberate. Dust clung to his boots, and the Mustang behind him gleamed like a memory made real. The townspeople, whispering now in urgent currents, watched as the stranger and the mechanic met in the center of the field. Phones were raised discreetly. Children peered from behind mothers' skirts. Someone from the diner dropped a tray with a clatter, but no one turned to look. Tom stood his ground, his hands rough and stained from a lifetime of service, meeting the stranger's approach with the wary patience of a man who had long since stopped expecting miracles. The stranger extended his hand. "Logan King," he said, though the words didn't need to be spoken aloud for Tom to understand. Logan King, son of Walter King, veteran, survivor, protector. Tom hesitated only a moment before gripping the offered hand. It was a solid handshake, no frills, no pretense. Just two men who understood the cost of time, the weight of sacrifice. Tom could feel the eyes of the town boring into his back, 1,000 unasked questions trembling on 1,000 tongues. But Logan didn't make a scene. He leaned in slightly, his voice pitched low for Tom's ears alone. He had heard what Tom had done for his father. He had seen the gleam of gratitude in Walter's eyes when he spoke of the old Fairlane, now a symbol of dignity restored. And Logan, too, had something to offer, not just thanks, but a future. In Idaho, Just across the border, Logan ran a company that restored vintage aircraft, Mustangs like the one behind him, Thunderbolts, Corsairs, old warhorses that carried the stories of another generation's battles. He needed men like Tom. Men who didn't just fix machines, but understood them. Men who respected history enough to coax it back to life. Tom listened, heart thudding, the words crashing against the walls he had built inside himself after so many years of small sacrifices unnoticed. He thought of his father's hands, steady and strong, showing him how to set a carburetor needle, how to sand a fender smooth. He thought of the shop, quiet now except for the ticking of the old clock above the door, marking time that seemed to move faster each day. For a moment, the choice seemed impossible. And yet, in the reflection of Logan's mirrored aviator glasses, Tom saw something he hadn't seen in himself for a long time: potential. The possibility of becoming part of something larger, something that honored not just machines, but the men and women who once rode them into history. The gathered crowd watched, breathless, as Tom gripped Logan's hand a little tighter. In the silence that followed, even the Mustang's engine seemed to hold its breath. Without a word, a promise passed between them. And somewhere, just beyond the edge of Elm Ridge, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of oil and leather and rain-washed dreams. Tom Harrison, the mechanic who had spent a lifetime repairing what others had abandoned, had just been offered a chance to fly. The days that followed were a blur, a slow, heavy tide pulling at Tom's every thought. The town buzzed with the story like a living thing, whispers threading through coffee shops, hardware stores, even the benches outside the post office. Some spoke of the plane, of course, marveling at its perfect landing and the impossible sight of it gleaming in the Montana sun. But most spoke of Tom Harrison, the mechanic who had patched up a forgotten veteran's dream and found himself standing at the threshold of another life entirely. Tom tried to keep to his routine, tried to ground himself in the small, ordinary tasks that had defined him for so long. He changed oil in an old ranch truck, replaced brake pads on a widow's battered minivan, reattached the side mirror on the school superintendent's sedan with duct tape and a quiet chuckle. But the world felt different now, as if the very air carried a hum he couldn't shake loose. Every turn of a wrench seemed slower, heavier, clouded by the weight of the choice laid before him. Each evening he sat alone at the edge of the workshop's porch, the thermos cooling by his side, watching the sunset bleed across the flatlands. He thought of Logan's offer, turning it over and over in his mind like a river stone worn smooth by doubt. He could see himself in Idaho, restoring the legends of another age, working among men and women who revered history the way he did. He could almost feel the hum of the hangars, the smell of old metal and machine oil, the ache of pride in his chest. And yet, when he closed his eyes, it wasn't the shine of vintage planes that filled his mind, it was the worn wooden beams of Harrison's garage, the battered red tool chest his father had left him, the cracked leather chair in the office where he had once fallen asleep as a boy, waiting for his dad to finish one last job. It was the sound of familiar voices calling out from the sidewalk, the clink of the workshop bell as townsfolk came and went, trusting him with the fragile bones of their daily lives. Tom was a part of Elm Ridge's fabric, stitched into the seams of its quiet existence. Leaving felt like pulling a thread loose, unraveling something sacred and small and irreplaceable. The fourth night after the plane landed, as Tom locked up the shop, he noticed a figure lingering at the edge of the lot. A boy, maybe 12 or 13, skinny as a fence post and clutching a greasy shop manual like it was a treasure map. His baseball cap was too large, shading his freckled face, but there was no mistaking the wide, eager eyes fixed on Tom. It was Jackson Brooks, the son of one of the part-time clerks at the general store. Tom had seen him hanging around now and then, sweeping the sidewalk, peeking in through the garage windows when he thought no one was looking. He was a good kid, quiet, respectful, but always watching, always hungry for something more. Tom walked over slowly, the gravel crunching under his boots. "You need something, Jackson?" he asked, the corners of his mouth lifting in a tired smile. Jackson shuffled awkwardly, scuffing the toe of his sneaker against the dirt. His voice, when it came, was small but sure. "I was just wondering if maybe you needed help sometimes. I can clean tools. Or sweep up. Maybe learn stuff. If you wanted to show me." Tom looked down at the boy, the same way, perhaps, his father had once looked at him, and something inside his chest shifted painfully. Jackson wasn't just offering to help. He was offering hope. A hand stretched across a widening gulf Tom hadn't even realized was opening under his feet. Tom ruffled the boy's cap gently. "Tell you what," he said, voice thick, "why don't you come by Saturday morning? We'll start with sweeping. Maybe see about changing a tire or two." Jackson's face lit up, a quick, brilliant thing, and Tom felt the old ache in his bones ease just a little. That night, as he sat on the porch under a cold quilt of stars, Tom realized the decision wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the life he was leaving behind, and the lives that would be left behind with it. Jackson needed someone to teach him, to believe in him. Elm Ridge needed a place where veterans could pull into the lot and find someone who understood why an old Fairlane mattered more than a shiny new car. And Tom needed a bridge between what he was and what he could still become. He spent the next day knee-deep in work, cleaning out the back room of the shop, sorting through parts, drawing up plans he hadn't dared think about before. If he could take Logan's offer and still keep the shop alive, if he could find a way to do both, maybe he didn't have to choose between his dreams and his duty. By sunset, a plan had begun to take shape, rough but strong. He would go to Idaho. He would work with Logan, restoring the wings of the past. He would learn, and grow, and bring new life into his own craft. But he would not abandon Elm Ridge. Every weekend, he would come back. He would teach Jackson everything he knew, one bolt, one gasket, one engine at a time. He would keep the workshop open for the veterans who needed him, who trusted him, who understood what it meant to have something broken made whole again. It wouldn't be easy. The miles would wear on him. The nights would sometimes feel longer than the Montana sky. But it was a life he could be proud of. A life that honored where he came from and where he was going. When he closed up the shop that night, he left the porch light on. Just like his father always had. A signal to anyone passing by that no matter how dark the night became, there was still a place to come home to. The first sign that something had shifted beyond the dusty streets of Elm Ridge came not with a letter or a knock at the door, but with a camera flash. Tom was bent over a battered Dodge pickup, replacing a cracked serpentine belt, when he heard the screen door of the garage creak open. He straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his worn flannel, expecting to find Jackson with his usual questions and eager grin. Instead, it was Mrs. Howard from the Elm Ridge Gazette, clutching a notepad and a camera with the fervor of someone who had finally found a story worth telling. She asked him for a few minutes. Tom, caught off guard and uncomfortable under attention, mumbled an agreement. She took photos of the shop, the old Ford Fairlane gleaming like a badge of honor in the corner, and scribbled furiously as he told her the bare bones of what had happened. He tried to downplay it, shrugging off his role as something anyone would have done. But Mrs. Howard, sharp-eyed and relentless, coaxed the truth from him, bit by bit. By the following Thursday, Tom's story was on the front page. Mechanic restores veteran's pride, receives once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Beneath the headline was a photo of Tom, standing stiff and awkward beside the Ford, the sunlight cutting across his withered face and the cracked concrete of the lot like a painter's deliberate brushstroke. At first, Tom thought nothing of it. Small towns loved a good human interest story, something to talk about between church services and town hall meetings. He expected the buzz to die down after a few days. But the world had grown larger than Elm Ridge. Within a week, veterans from neighboring towns started arriving, some driving ancient, wheezing trucks, others towing battered motorcycles, a few simply clutching photos of vehicles long since surrendered to rust. They came not with demands, but with hope etched deep into the lines of their faces. Hope that maybe someone still cared enough to bring a piece of their past back to life. Tom found himself working later and later into the evenings. Jackson, eager and tireless, was at his side more often now, sweeping floors, sorting tools, watching intently as Tom explained the delicate art of balancing an engine or coaxing a dented fender back into shape. The boy had a natural instinct for machines, a quickness in his hands and a patience rare for someone his age. It reminded Tom painfully of his own younger self, trailing after his father, desperate to be useful. The orders piled up faster than he could manage alone. Veterans from towns Tom had never even visited showed up with tearful gratitude, bringing with them not just broken vehicles, but broken pieces of themselves. Every car, every truck, every battered motorcycle became a restoration not just of metal and paint, but of memory, of dignity, of time that refused to stay buried. Morelli's market offered to supply snacks and coffee to the veterans while they waited. The church down the street started organizing volunteers to drive the elderly to and from the garage. Even Harold Jennings, who had once grumbled about handouts ruining good business, showed up one afternoon with 2 jugs of donated motor oil and a sheepish shrug. The town was waking up, shaking off the dust of indifference, drawn together by the simplest of things. Kindness shone without expectation. Tom worked through it all with the same quiet diligence that had always defined him. He didn't seek praise. He didn't make speeches. He fixed what was broken because it was the only thing that ever made sense to him. Because somewhere deep inside, he understood that people, like machines, sometimes just needed someone to believe they were worth saving. Logan King called again, checking in, offering reassurances that the spot in Idaho was still waiting. They would work out a schedule, he promised, one that allowed Tom to keep both his new life and the one he had built here. Logan understood. He had seen firsthand what it meant to belong to 2 worlds. Tom hung up the phone that evening and stood alone in the workshop, the last light of day stretching long shadows across the concrete floor. He ran a hand along the hood of an old Army Jeep waiting for its turn under his care, feeling the cool, pitted metal beneath his fingertips. A photograph of his father, tucked into a dusty frame above the workbench, caught his eye. Tom smiled, small and sad and full of something heavier than words. He was building something here. Not just engines. Not just restorations. He was building a bridge between past and future, between memory and hope. The next Saturday, a convoy of motorcycles rolled into Elm Ridge. Veterans from 3 counties, riding in formation, their engines rumbling like thunder across the wide-open sky. They parked outside Harrison's garage, dismounted with slow, careful movements, and lined up. At the head of the group, an elderly Marine stepped forward, a battered coin clenched in his gnarled fist. Tom wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out to meet them, uncertain, wary of ceremony. The Marine saluted, slow and deliberate, and pressed the coin into Tom's palm. It was a challenge coin, worn thin from years of passing between hands that knew what sacrifice meant. On one side, the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. On the other, a simple phrase. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. No speeches were made. None were needed. The men and women standing in the gravel lot understood more with their silence than 1,000 words could say. Tom closed his fingers around the coin, the weight of it anchoring him to the ground beneath his feet. He looked at Jackson, standing just inside the garage door, his face bright with pride. He looked at the veterans, waiting patiently. He looked at the workshop, patched and cracked but still standing strong. Tom Harrison knew, in that moment, that he didn't have to choose between 2 lives. He had already built both. One act of kindness had simply opened the door wide enough for the world to walk in. And he, in turn, had chosen to walk out and meet it halfway. Spring arrived late in Elm Ridge that year, dragging itself across the muddy fields and snow-dusted hills like an old soldier returning home. It came not with the rush of blossoms or the sudden warmth of southern air, but with slow thaws, with ice cracking on the riverbanks, with the first brave daffodils shivering against the wind. And with it came the beginning of Tom Harrison's new life, unfolding quietly, steadily, without grand announcements or fanfare. Every Monday morning, before the sun lifted above the mountains, Tom packed his tools into the back of an old pickup and set off toward Idaho. The drive stretched out ahead of him like a gray ribbon through the plains, the distant peaks standing guard over his passage. It was a long road, and often a lonely one, but it was lined with something he had once feared he had lost entirely: purpose. At Logan King's restoration company, Tom found himself surrounded by machines older than memory itself, vintage aircraft with faded nose art and wings that bore the scars of forgotten wars. Corsairs, Thunderbolts, Mustangs, each one a puzzle of history waiting to be pieced back together. Here, every bolt tightened was a salute to the past, every polished fuselage a resurrection of something once thought lost. The men and women he worked alongside were as varied as the planes they tended, former military engineers, history buffs, craftsmen with rough hands and gentler hearts. They spoke in low voices, moved with precision, and understood, without needing to say it, that what they were preserving wasn't just metal and rivets. It was memory. It was sacrifice. It was stories that might otherwise vanish like smoke in the wind. Tom's hands, shaped by years of stubborn labor, fit perfectly into this place. He restored landing gear with the same reverence he had once reserved for carburetors. He repainted faded insignias, each brushstroke laid with care as if writing a letter to the ghosts of the past. Slowly, steadily, he earned the respect of those around him, not because he asked for it, but because he never did. Yet no matter how fulfilling the work in Idaho became, it never claimed all of him. Every Friday evening, Tom turned the truck back toward Elm Ridge, his mind already shifting toward the life waiting there. By Saturday morning, the garage doors at Harrison's would swing open, the old bell above the frame clanging like a heartbeat, and the small, dusty lot would fill with life. Jackson Burks was there, almost always before sunrise, eager hands already blackened with grease, a grin stretching across his young face. Together, they rebuilt transmissions, hammered out rusted panels, rewired stubborn engines. The boy soaked up knowledge faster than Tom could pour it out, asking questions with the hunger of someone who understood that learning was its own kind of freedom. The veterans kept coming too, steady as the seasons. Some brought vehicles for restoration, others simply brought stories, folded in old wallets or etched into their faces. They came not just for repairs, but for connection, for the unspoken understanding that in this place, at this dusty little workshop tucked into the edge of nowhere, they were seen. They mattered. Bit by bit, the garage transformed. A fresh coat of paint. New gravel in the lot. An old vending machine humming to life with donated sodas and candy bars. A bulletin board cluttered with photos, smiling faces beside gleaming cars and restored motorcycles, handshakes sealed in grease-stained hands. Above the counter, Tom hung a plaque carved by one of the local woodworkers. It read simply, "In service to those who served." One morning, as Tom wiped down his tools and prepared for the long drive westward, Jackson tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Harrison," he said, hesitating, "someday, when you're ready, could I maybe take over the shop for good?" Tom looked at the boy, standing there with well-smudged jeans and hope shining in his eyes, and something old and heavy eased inside him, like a gear slipping into place after years of grinding in vain. "Someday," Tom said, voice rough, "you'll make it even better." He believed it. He had no doubt at all. By midsummer, Elm Ridge had changed in ways small towns rarely did. The diner served veterans' breakfasts on the first Saturday of every month. The town council voted to create a fund for families of service members in need of vehicle repairs. Even the local high school added a shop class named after Tom's late father, Harrison's Principles of Mechanics and Service. It wasn't fanfare or fame that had built this. It was the slow, steady work of quiet kindness. It was a single act, an old Ford Fairlane, restored on a freezing night, not for profit, not for praise, but because someone needed it. In the end, it was enough. Tom often thought of that night, when he had worked alone under a single swaying light, tired beyond measure but unwilling to walk away. He thought of how simple the decision had been: do the work. Give what you can. Hope it matters. And it had. The workshop was still small. The skies above Elm Ridge were still wide and empty most days. The road ahead was still long. But for the first time in a long while, Tom didn't walk it alone. He walked it carrying history, carrying hope. And every so often, when the wind shifted just right, he could almost hear the distant hum of the Mustang's engine, stitching across the sky, a reminder that kindness without question was enough to lift even the heaviest heart into flight.